This incident occurred on the night of January the 2nd, 2010. As students, we celebrated the new year with a large crowd at a classmate's dacha in the far Moscow region. We celebrated cheerfully and loudly since no one went to the cottages in winter and we were alone in the village. After dancing a lot and putting on fireworks the day before, on January the 1st we got out of the house only in the evening. The weather was wonderful, the frost was 20 degrees and there was no wind at all. We, dressed up in all sorts of old sweatshirts that we found in the attic, decided to light a barbecue in the yard and fry kebabs for dinner. When we sat down to dinner, it was already quite dark, the fire warmed pleasantly and illuminated the pre-house territory, and under all this mystical atmosphere, we began to poison all sorts of scary stories. The owner of the house, Sasha, spoke last, when everyone had already exhausted the stock of stories. Sasha's parents bought a cottage in the late 90s, when the village was still residential. Well, as a residential there were only old-timers, old men and old women. Young people were rapidly moving to Moscow, so this house was sold to them by a young woman of about 30. Sasha was no more than 10 years old at that time, but he remembered the woman very well because in her younger years she was half grey. Then his parents assumed that the former hostess had health problems since in addition to grey hair, she insisted that people come to see the house only in the morning or afternoon. In the evening, at dusk and it would be more convenient for working parents, she flatly refused to go to the village. But she sold the house for mere pennies, so Sasha's parents did not pay attention to the oddities of the lady, quickly made a deal and never met her again. The only thing that slightly spoiled the festive mood from the purchase was the last words of the hostess of the house, already on the threshold of the notary office. Looking guiltily at her mother, she said that she highly recommends that it is always good to lock the house at night from the inside and tightly cover all the windows. She did not answer her parents' questions, she only threw, "You find out soon enough," and she left. The father and the brave little Sasha did not attach importance to her words. Only the impressionable mother all these years stubbornly followed the advice of the old mistress and even said that at first she saw someone running around the yard at night and spinning like a top. She saw it only once, but she was so scared that she never stayed alone at the dacha anymore. And the grandson of one of the local residents, with whom Sashka ran to the river as a child, once told that he heard his grandmother and her neighbors discussing that finally the guests from the old cemetery would stop walking after the arrival of some priest. That was the end of Sasha's story, we digested it in silence. Yes, in fact, he didn't say anything terrible. But when you sit in the middle of the night by the campfire in the place where, according to the stories, guests from the cemetery circled, the adrenaline rush is good. Moreover, this is the most abandoned cemetery we saw at the entrance to the village. They opened another bottle of wine and began to discuss what the locals were so afraid of, what kind of guests. What did Sasha's mother see in the yard a few years ago that scared her so much? In general, we, drunk students, decided to visit the cemetery immediately so that questions would be excluded. While we were walking in a friendly crowd through the village lit by lanterns, it was not scary. The last lantern stood at the last house. And there was still 60 meters from this house to the cemetery. Almost all the girls, except for me and my bosom friend Svetika, remained under this very lantern. It was already creepy to go further. Svetika and I went further to impress our boys. There were snowdrifts all around, but a path had been cleared to the cemetery gate. It was safe to walk along it together, hand in hand. Who could have cleared the path to an abandoned cemetery in an extinct dacha village? We didn't think about it then. For these 60 meters from the road to the gate, 2 more guys spun off from us. Joking about the fact that they are cowards, the 5 of us got to the gate. Me, Svetik, the owner of the dacha Sashka, Alik, who is stubbornly caring for me, and his twin brother Vadim. At the gate we froze. I didn't want to go in. I clung to Alik's hand with a death grip, which he was very pleased with. It was scary. But we were young and very drunk, we didn't think about the consequences. It was important to make an impression, and Alik boldly opened the rusty gate. We entered the territory of the cemetery. For some reason, none of us thought to take a flashlight. Although, probably, this saved us from losing our minds, then we saw only silhouettes. Silhouettes of tombstones and crooked crosses, silhouettes of trees. Silhouettes of each other. We stood on the territory of the cemetery and even, a little emboldened, went 10 meters deep. Svetkin's screech sharply broke the impending silence. Following the light, we all shouted together and rushed away to the illuminated road. Just as quickly and not very organized, our whole company was in the house. We didn't know who or what we were running from, because after Svetka screamed, no one began to find out what scared her so much. Svetka herself was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, and sobbing hysterically, constantly looking back at the window. The prudent Sashka handed her a full glass of wine, which Svetik drank in one gulp, and finally began to calm down. And along the way, she began to tell how she saw that a man got up from the grave mound, just like from the floor. She couldn't describe him, she only saw his silhouette. But it was definitely quite a material silhouette of an adult man. We looked at each other in silence. I wanted a logical explanation, and we began to accuse the guys who did not reach the cemetery gate with us that they walked around it from the side unnoticed by us and decided to scare us so, but the version disappeared by itself since we simply could not help noticing them. No. They were standing with us when Sveta screamed and the 6 of you poured out of the cemetery. Vika, who remained under the lantern, defended the guys when she and I went out to smoke. You mean the 5 of us? There were 5 of us, I corrected automatically. No. There were definitely 6 of you. You ran down the path in 3 pairs. I'm not blind. Vika looked up at me and we raced into the house and bolted the door. And then all together tightly hung windows all over the house. An hour later, the fear let go, Svetik fell asleep, and we were already discussing with a smile that both Svetik and Vika just seemed to be afraid. A girl's fantasy has played out, it happens. Vika was offended and claimed that she could count to 6 perfectly. And then we heard a real howl from the yard. Silence fell instantly. We are even, like kittens, tightly gathered in one pile. Svetik woke up on the sofa and stared at one point with her eyes dazed with fear. The howl was interrupted and repeated again and again. And then we heard someone scratching on the wall of the house. There was a feeling that they were walking around the house around the perimeter and looking for an entrance. It lasted until dawn. The walls of the house were scratching, there was a howl, then some kind of cackling. We were so scared that we didn't even talk to each other the whole time. They just looked at each other and listened. The boys dared to leave the house when it was already noon. The sun was shining, there was no one in the yard. And there was no snow around the house. He was trampled to the black earth. The chain of footprints went over the fence, along the snowdrifts towards the cemetery. We left for Moscow within an hour. We didn't even call each other back before the session started. And Svetik didn't come to the first exam. From her brother, who studied 2 years older, we learned that Svetik is in the neurosis clinic, claims that some man is constantly following her, talking to her. Svetik kept repeating. I was paired with him, he was the 6th. She never left the clinic. She died at night from a broken heart. Doctors found her in the morning. Svetik was grey-haired. She was 19 years old.